The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Have you ever found yourself desperately searching for your one true passion while feeling like everyone else has figured out something you're missing? That gnawing sensation in your chest when someone asks what you're passionate about and you fumble for words that sound convincing even to yourself. You're not alone in this struggle. And more importantly, you're not broken. What if I told you that the very advice meant to set you free has become your prison? That follow your passion might be the most destructive lie ever sold to the human spirit? Carl Jung, one of the greatest scholars of the human mind, understood something profound about human nature that our culture has forgotten. He knew that what we seek outside ourselves often masks what we're afraid to confront within. The passionate life you're chasing, it's not hiding somewhere out there waiting to be discovered. It's buried beneath layers of who you think you should be. Think about it. How many times have you scrolled through profiles of people who seem to have found their calling, feeling that familiar sting of inadequacy? How many career quizzes have you taken, hoping the algorithm would reveal what your own heart cannot? How many times have you forced enthusiasm for things that looked good on paper but felt hollow in your bones? This isn't about lacking passion, this is about running from it. Jung called this phenomenon projection. We see in others what we cannot see in ourselves. That person whose work lights them up from within. That artist who seems to channel pure creative fire. That entrepreneur who radiates purpose. You're not seeing their passion, you're seeing your own unlived potential reflected back at you like light bouncing off a mirror. But here's what nobody tells you about mirrors. They only show you what you're willing to look at. The modern obsession with finding your passion has created a psychological split that Jung would recognize immediately. On one side stands who you think you should be, passionate, driven, clear about your purpose. On the other side stands who you actually are, complex, contradictory, carrying desires that don't fit neat categories or inspirational quotes. Most people spend their entire lives trying to bridge this gap by manufacturing passion rather than meeting themselves where they are. Ask yourself this question and answer honestly. What if your passion isn't missing? What if it's hidden beneath everything you've been taught to reject about yourself? Jung understood that the human psyche operates like an iceberg. The tip that shows above water, your conscious mind, your acceptable desires, your socially approved ambitions, represents only a fraction of who you are. Beneath the surface lies what he called the shadow, all the aspects of yourself that don't fit the image you're trying to maintain. Your shadow contains your rage, your selfishness, your messy emotions, your unconventional desires, your rebellious thoughts. It holds every part of you that doesn't align with the person you think you should be. And here's the revelation that changes everything. Your shadow also contains your greatest gifts. The very traits you've learned to suppress, the impulses you've been taught to ignore, the parts of yourself you've deemed unacceptable. These aren't obstacles to finding your passion. They are breadcrumbs leading you back to your authentic self. Think about what you judge in others. The person who seems too aggressive in pursuing their goals. The artist who appears self-absorbed in their creative process. The entrepreneur who prioritizes their vision over popular opinion. Your judgment reveals what you've disowned in yourself. Your criticism points directly toward qualities you need to reclaim. This is why the follow your passion advice fails so spectacularly. It assumes your passion exists in some pure, socially acceptable form that you can simply identify and pursue. But real passion emerges from the integration of your whole self, light and shadow, acceptable and forbidden, polite and raw. The truth is, you can't find what you refuse to become. Jung observed that most people live their lives wearing masks, what he called personas. These masks help us navigate social expectations and professional requirements. But when the mask becomes your identity, when you forget there's a real person underneath, you lose access to the very energy that fuels authentic passion. Your persona might be the helpful team player who never rocks the boat. Beneath that mask might live a revolutionary spirit that wants to challenge systems and create change. Your persona might be the rational, logical thinker who dismisses emotions. Underneath might dwell an artist who experiences the world through feeling and intuition. The passionate life you're seeking can't be lived through a mask. It requires the courage to show up as your complete, unedited self. But here's where it gets complicated. Society rewards certain masks and punishes authenticity. You learned early which parts of yourself were acceptable and which needed to be hidden. You discovered that expressing certain desires brought approval, while others brought rejection. Over time, you became so skilled at wearing the approved mask that you forgot it wasn't really you. This is the shadow of false passion, the exhausting performance of enthusiasm for things that align with your mask rather than your authentic nature. You might have convinced yourself that you're passionate about climbing the corporate ladder when what really excites you is creating beauty. You might have decided you're passionate about helping others when what truly energizes you is solving complex problems in solitude. The internal weather system of your emotions tries to tell you when you're living out of alignment. That Sunday night dread before returning to work you claim to love. That restless energy that no amount of achievement seems to satisfy. That persistent sense that you're living someone else's life while your real life remains unlived. These aren't signs that you're ungrateful or lacking motivation. They're your psyche's way of signaling that the mask has taken over and your authentic self is suffocating underneath. Jung believed that the unconscious mind constantly tries to restore balance. When you deny certain aspects of yourself, they don't disappear. They go underground and begin influencing your life in ways you don't recognize. The creative impulse you've suppressed might emerge as an obsession with other people's art. The leadership qualities you've rejected might show up as criticism of authority figures. The adventurous spirit you've buried might manifest as chronic restlessness in your stable, sensible life. Your unconscious is always trying to complete you, to bring into awareness what you've pushed into darkness. But most people interpret these signals as problems to be solved rather than messages to be understood. The person struggling to find their passion isn't lacking something external. They're struggling to integrate something internal. They're at war with parts of themselves that hold the very energy they're seeking to cultivate. This internal war is exhausting. It splits your energy between maintaining the acceptable image and suppressing the unacceptable truth. No wonder you feel depleted rather than passionate. You're using most of your life force to fight against yourself. What you resist persists. What you deny controls you. What you refuse to acknowledge about yourself continues to operate from the shadows, influencing your choices in ways that lead you further from, rather than closer to authentic expression. The moment you begin to recognize this pattern, everything starts to shift. Awareness itself begins the healing process. You start to see how much energy you've been spending on the maintenance of false passion, rather than the cultivation of authentic expression. But recognition is just the beginning. The real work lies in learning to integrate what you've separated, to reclaim what you've projected, to heal the split between who you are and who you think you should be. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. It's not about perfection or eliminating your shadow. It's about conscious relationship with all aspects of yourself. It's about learning to dance with your contradictions rather than trying to resolve them. This is where the real transformation begins, not in the desperate search for passion outside yourself, but in the courageous acceptance of the passion that already lives within you, waiting to be acknowledged, integrated, and expressed. The person you're trying to become already exists. They're not hiding in some future version of success or achievement. They're buried beneath years of conditioning that taught you to reject parts of yourself that didn't fit the mold. Your task isn't to find your passion. Your task is to stop fighting against the parts of yourself that carry it. This realization changes everything. Instead of looking outward for clues about who you should become, you begin looking inward at what you've been refusing to be. Instead of trying to manufacture enthusiasm for socially approved pursuits, you start paying attention to what naturally energizes you, even if it doesn't fit conventional definitions of success. Instead of forcing yourself into predetermined molds, you begin the radical act of becoming who you actually are. But this journey requires something our culture rarely teaches: the willingness to disappoint people who are invested in your mask, the courage to let go of identities that no longer serve you, the strength to stand in the discomfort of not knowing who you are while you remember who you've always been. Most people would rather live with the familiar pain of feeling lost than face the unknown territory of authentic self-expression. They choose the devil they know, the exhaustion of false passion, over the devil they don't know, the vulnerability of showing up as their real self. But what if I told you that the very thing you're avoiding holds the key to everything you're seeking? What if the parts of yourself you've learned to hide contain the exact qualities needed to live with genuine passion and purpose. The parts of yourself you've learned to hide contain the exact qualities needed to live with genuine passion and purpose. But knowing this intellectually and experiencing it viscerally are two completely different things. The gap between understanding and transformation is where most people get stuck, spinning their wheels in endless self-analysis without ever moving into authentic action. Jung understood that real change happens not through elimination of unwanted aspects, but through integration. You don't heal by cutting off parts of yourself. You heal by bringing them into conscious relationship with each other. Think about the qualities you most admire in others. That person who speaks their truth regardless of consequences. The artist who creates from pure authenticity rather than market demands. The leader who makes difficult decisions without needing everyone's approval. What you're seeing isn't their perfection. You're witnessing their integration. They've learned to dance with their contradictions rather than resolve them. They've made peace with being both kind and fierce, both vulnerable and strong, both creative and practical. This isn't about balance in the way most people think about it, carefully measuring out equal portions of different traits. This is about wholeness. Wholeness means you can access different aspects of yourself as situations require. You can be gentle when gentleness serves, and ruthless when ruthlessness is needed. You can be collaborative when collaboration creates the best outcome, and independent when independence is called for. You can be emotional when emotions carry wisdom and logical when logic provides clarity. Most people live with an internal committee where different parts of themselves argue constantly. The practical voice battles the creative voice. The people pleaser fights with the boundary setter. The ambitious part wars with the part that just wants peace. This internal conflict drains enormous amounts of energy that could otherwise fuel passionate engagement with life. Integration doesn't mean these different aspects stop having opinions. It means you become the conscious conductor of your internal orchestra, instead of letting the instruments play against each other in chaotic noise. But how do you begin this process when you've spent years pushing certain parts of yourself into exile? The answer lies in understanding projection. Everything you see in others, both what you admire and what you despise, exists somewhere within your own psyche. Jung called this the fundamental truth of psychological projection. We can only recognize in others what we already carry within ourselves. That person whose confidence intimidates you, you have confidence that you've learned to suppress. That individual whose creativity you envy, you have creative potential that you've been afraid to express. That leader whose decisiveness you criticize as aggressive, you have decisiveness that you've been taught to hide behind consensus-seeking behavior. Your judgments are maps leading back to your disowned qualities. Start paying attention to your emotional reactions to other people. When someone triggers irritation, ask yourself what quality they're displaying that you've rejected in yourself. When someone sparks admiration, look for where that same capacity lives within you, probably dormant from lack of expression. This isn't comfortable work. Your ego has invested considerable energy in maintaining the story of who you are versus who you're not. Recognizing that you contain the very qualities you've defined yourself against creates what Jung called cognitive dissonance. The mind rebels against information that threatens its established identity structure, but this rebellion is precisely what signals you're approaching authentic territory. Resistance often marks the location of buried treasure. Consider the person you judge most harshly. What specific behaviors or attitudes trigger your strongest negative reactions? Write them down. Now ask yourself where these same tendencies might live within you, perhaps in different forms or suppressed so thoroughly you don't recognize them. The person who seems selfish and self-absorbed might be showing you your own capacity for healthy self-interest that you've sacrificed on the altar of people-pleasing. The individual who appears controlling might be reflecting your own leadership abilities that you've been afraid to own. The colleague who seems emotionally volatile might be mirroring your own passionate nature that you've learned to suppress. This process of projection withdrawal, recognizing and reclaiming what you've placed onto others, returns enormous amounts of energy to your system. Energy that was bound up in judgment and criticism becomes available for creative expression and authentic action. But projection withdrawal requires brutal honesty about your own capacity for the full spectrum of human experience. You must be willing to acknowledge that you contain both saint and sinner, both light and shadow, both noble and petty impulses. Most people resist this recognition because they've been taught that good people only have good qualities. This is psychological fundamentalism, the belief that virtue requires the elimination of anything that might be considered negative or unacceptable. Jung knew better. He understood that the goal of psychological development isn't moral perfection, but conscious completeness. A person of genuine integrity owns their capacity for both creation and destruction, both love and hate, both service and selfishness. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or abandoning ethical behavior. It means acknowledging the full range of your human nature so that you can make conscious choices about how to express it. When you accept your capacity for selfishness, you can choose generosity from a place of authentic power rather than unconscious compensation. When you own your aggressive impulses, you can channel that energy into passionate advocacy for what matters to you. When you acknowledge your manipulative tendencies, you can develop genuine influence skills based on authentic connection rather than hidden agendas. The shadow contains not just your rejected negative qualities, but also your rejected positive ones. Many people have disowned their intelligence because they were told it made others feel bad. Others have suppressed their beauty because they learned it was vain or threatening. Some have buried their leadership abilities because they were taught that power corrupts. These rejected positive qualities, what Jung called the golden shadow, often contain the exact energies needed to express your authentic passion. The intelligence you've been hiding might be essential for the complex problems you're meant to solve. The beauty you've been downplaying might be crucial for the aesthetic transformation you're here to create. The power you've been avoiding might be necessary for the changes you're called to make. Reclaiming your golden shadow requires examining not just what you dislike about yourself, but what you've been afraid to like. What compliments do you deflect? What strengths do you minimize? What capabilities do you downplay to avoid standing out? Your discomfort with your own gifts often runs deeper than your discomfort with your flaws. Flaws can be fixed or forgiven. Gifts require you to step into responsibility for your impact on the world. They demand that you stop hiding and start contributing. They insist that you claim your place in the arena of meaningful action. This is why so many people unconsciously sabotage their own success. It's not that they want to fail, it's that success would require them to own their power, and they've been programmed to believe that power is dangerous or corrupting. But power itself is neutral. It's simply the capacity to create change. The question isn't whether you have power. You do. The question is whether you'll use it consciously or let it operate through unconscious patterns that create outcomes you don't want. Jung observed that the unconscious will always find ways to express what consciousness refuses to acknowledge. If you won't own your power consciously, it will emerge unconsciously through passive-aggressive behavior, manipulation, or subtle control tactics. If you won't claim your creativity directly, it might show up as chronic dissatisfaction with other people's creative work. If you won't express your leadership abilities openly, you might find yourself constantly criticizing existing leaders. The energy wants expression. The only question is whether that expression will be conscious and constructive, or unconscious and potentially destructive. This is why authentic passion requires integration rather than elimination of difficult aspects. When you try to be purely positive, purely selfless, purely agreeable, you split off enormous amounts of energy that then operate from the shadows. This split energy can't fuel passionate engagement because it's locked in internal conflict. But when you acknowledge and integrate your full spectrum of human nature, that energy becomes available for conscious expression. You can be fierce in defense of what you love. You can be selfish about protecting your creative time. You can be ruthless about eliminating what doesn't serve your highest expression. These aren't character flaws to be overcome. They're essential qualities that, when integrated consciously, become fuel for passionate living. The process of integration happens through what Jung called active imagination, conscious dialogue with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Instead of pushing away difficult emotions or impulses, you learn to turn toward them with curiosity. When you feel anger, instead of suppressing it or acting it out unconsciously, you ask what it's trying to tell you. Anger often carries information about boundaries that have been crossed or values that have been violated. When you feel envy, instead of judging yourself for having such an ugly emotion, you explore what it reveals about desires you haven't been willing to acknowledge. When you feel fear, instead of pushing through it or being paralyzed by it, you investigate what it's trying to protect. Your emotions aren't problems to be solved. They're messengers carrying information about your authentic needs and desires. But you can only receive their messages when you stop treating them as enemies and start relating to them as allies. This shift in relationship with your internal experience changes everything. Instead of being at war with parts of yourself, you become curious about what they're trying to contribute to your wholeness. Instead of fighting your contradictions, you start exploring how they might work together in service of your authentic expression. The fierce part of you and the gentle part don't have to cancel each other out. They can collaborate to create passionate advocacy for what you care about. The practical part and the visionary part don't have to battle for dominance. They can partner to bring inspired ideas into concrete reality. The independent part and the collaborative part don't have to argue about whether you need others. They can work together to create authentic relationships that support rather than diminish your individual expression. This is the secret that people living passionate lives have learned. They haven't eliminated their contradictions. They've learned to orchestrate them in service of something larger than any single aspect of themselves. But this orchestration requires a conductor, a conscious self that can hold space for all the different instruments in your internal orchestra. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposing forces in creative tension until something new emerges. Most people collapse into one side or the other when faced with internal contradictions. They become either overly aggressive or completely passive, either rigidly logical or purely emotional, either fiercely independent or completely dependent. The transcendent function allows you to be both and, rather than either or. You can be both confident and humble, both strong and vulnerable, both focused and flexible. These aren't contradictions to be resolved, but paradoxes to be embodied. The person living with authentic passion has learned to dance in the tension between opposites, rather than trying to eliminate one side or the other. This dance becomes the source of tremendous creative energy. When you no longer waste power fighting against yourself, all that energy becomes available for engagement with the world. When you stop trying to maintain impossible standards of perfection, you can show up as your complex, contradictory, beautifully human self. And here's what happens when you make that shift. The very thing you've been seeking begins seeking you. Opportunities align with your authentic nature rather than your performed image. Relationships form based on who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. Work becomes an expression of your integrated self rather than a performance of acceptability. The passionate life you've been chasing stops being something you pursue and becomes something you embody. But this embodiment requires one final crucial step, the courage to stop trying to find your passion and start being it. The courage to stop trying to find your passion and start being it changes everything. But what does it actually mean to be your passion rather than pursue it? And how do you make this shift when everything in your conditioning tells you that passion is something you achieve rather than something you are? The answer lies in understanding what Jung called the moment of recognition, that pivotal instant when the seeking stops and the being begins. It's not a dramatic revelation that strikes like lightning. It's more like the gradual dawn, where darkness doesn't disappear all at once, but slowly gives way to light that was always there. You'll know this moment by how it feels in your body. The chronic tension in your shoulders from carrying the weight of who you should be begins to ease. The knot in your stomach from forcing enthusiasm for things that don't truly matter starts to dissolve. The exhaustion from maintaining masks and personas begins to lift. This isn't the relief of finally finding the right answer. This is the relief of finally stopping to ask the wrong question. For years you've been asking, what is my passion, when the real question is, who am I when I stop pretending to be someone else? You've been searching for what you should become when transformation happens through accepting what you already are. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most alive, most yourself, most connected to something larger than your individual concerns. What were you doing? More importantly, who were you being in those moments? You weren't performing passion. You weren't manufacturing enthusiasm. You weren't trying to impress anyone or meet any external standard. You were simply present with what was true for you in that moment, expressing it without apology or explanation. That's what authentic passion looks like. Not the fevered excitement of chasing something outside yourself, but the quiet certainty that comes from aligning your actions with your integrated nature. Jung observed that when we stop fighting our contradictions and start dancing with them, something remarkable happens. The energy that was previously locked in internal conflict becomes available for creative expression. The life force that was bound up in maintaining false personas gets redirected toward authentic engagement with reality. But this redirection doesn't happen automatically. It requires what Jung called conscious participation in your own transformation. You have to actively choose authenticity over acceptability, truth over comfort, wholeness over perfection. This choice presents itself dozens of times each day. When someone asks your opinion and you feel the impulse to say what they want to hear instead of what you actually think, when you're offered an opportunity that looks good on paper but feels hollow in your bones, when you catch yourself performing enthusiasm for something that doesn't genuinely excite you. Each of these moments is a fork in the road. One path leads back toward the familiar prison of false passion. The other leads toward the unfamiliar freedom of authentic expression. Most people choose the familiar path because freedom feels more dangerous than captivity. At least in your current prison, you know the rules. You understand what's expected of you. You can predict the outcomes of your choices. Authentic expression offers no such guarantees. When you show up as your real self, you don't know how people will respond. When you pursue what genuinely interests you rather than what seems practical or impressive, you can't predict where it will lead. When you speak your truth instead of the acceptable truth, you risk rejection, criticism, or misunderstanding. But here's what nobody tells you about this risk. The people who reject your authentic self weren't really accepting you anyway. They were accepting your performance. The opportunities that disappear when you stop pretending weren't aligned with who you actually are. The relationships that can't survive your honesty weren't built on genuine connection. You're not losing anything real when you choose authenticity. You're simply stopping the exhausting work of maintaining illusions. And in that space where the illusions used to be, something extraordinary begins to happen. Life starts responding to who you actually are, rather than who you've been pretending to be. Opportunities emerge that match your authentic interests, rather than your performed capabilities. People appear who appreciate your real self, rather than your acceptable self. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to occur when we align with our authentic nature. It's not magic, though it can feel magical. It's simply what happens when you stop working against your own grain and start moving in harmony with your true direction. But synchronicity isn't a reward for good behavior or a sign that you've finally figured everything out. It's the natural result of integrated energy flowing in coherent directions, rather than scattered energy pulling in conflicting ways. When all parts of yourself are working together instead of against each other, you become a powerful force in the world, not because you've eliminated your weaknesses, but because you've learned to orchestrate your contradictions in service of your authentic expression. This orchestration becomes a daily practice rather than a one-time achievement. Every morning you wake up and choose whether to show up as your integrated self or retreat into familiar patterns of performance and pretense. Some days the choice feels easy. Your energy is high, your confidence is strong, and authenticity flows naturally. Other days it feels like swimming upstream against currents of conditioning, expectation, and fear. On those difficult days, remember that the struggle itself is part of the process. Jung understood that individuation, becoming who you truly are, isn't a destination, but a direction. You don't arrive at authenticity and then live happily ever after in some state of permanent self-actualization. You choose authenticity moment by moment, decision by decision, response by response, and each time you choose truth over comfort, wholeness over perfection, being over seeming, you strengthen the neural pathways that make authentic expression easier the next time. This is why awareness itself begins the healing process. Simply recognizing when you're operating from your false persona rather than your authentic self creates the possibility of choice. You can't change patterns you don't see, but once you see them, you can begin to choose differently. Start paying attention to your internal weather throughout the day. When do you feel expansive and energized? When do you feel contracted and drained? What situations call forth your authentic self? What circumstances trigger your protective personas? Your emotions are constantly providing feedback about alignment and misalignment. Excitement, curiosity, and genuine enthusiasm signal movement toward authenticity. Boredom, resentment, and that particular exhaustion that comes from performing rather than being signal movement away from your true self. This internal guidance system is more reliable than any external advice or prescribed path. Your body knows when you're in alignment with your authentic nature. Your emotions respond to truth in ways that your mind can rationalize away. But learning to trust this internal guidance requires unlearning years of conditioning that taught you to dismiss your feelings as irrelevant or unreliable. You've been trained to value other people's opinions over your own instincts, external validation over internal knowing, logical analysis over intuitive wisdom. Reclaiming trust in your own experience is essential for living authentically. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or ignoring feedback from others. It means developing the capacity to filter external input through your own authentic values rather than automatically deferring to outside authority. When someone gives you advice, you can appreciate their perspective while checking it against your own inner knowing. When opportunities arise, you can evaluate them based on authentic fit rather than just external attractiveness. When pressure mounts to conform to expectations, you can choose conscious response rather than automatic compliance. This process of learning to trust yourself while remaining open to others requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without collapsing into any single viewpoint. You can value other people's input while maintaining connection to your own truth. You can consider practical concerns while honoring your authentic desires. You can be responsible to your commitments while remaining true to your evolving self. The key is learning to navigate these tensions consciously rather than letting them pull you into unconscious patterns of either rebellion or compliance. Neither complete independence nor complete dependence serves authentic expression. The path lies in conscious interdependence, maintaining your authentic center while engaging meaningfully with others. This conscious engagement transforms not just your relationship with yourself, but your relationships with others. When you stop seeking validation for your false persona and start sharing your authentic self, you attract people who appreciate who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. These authentic relationships provide a foundation of support that makes continued authenticity easier rather than harder. Instead of feeling like you have to choose between being yourself and being connected, you start experiencing how authenticity enhances rather than threatens real intimacy. But building these relationships requires the courage to disappoint people who are invested in your false persona. Some people have become attached to the version of you that always says yes, never rocks the boat, or consistently prioritizes their needs over your own. When you start setting boundaries, speaking truth, or pursuing your authentic interests, they may feel abandoned or betrayed. This is one of the most challenging aspects of the individuation process. It requires grieving the loss of relationships that were based on false connection while remaining open to relationships based on authentic recognition. Not everyone will understand or support your journey toward authenticity. Some people have too much invested in the current system to celebrate your liberation from it. Others are threatened by your courage to be yourself because it highlights their own choice to remain hidden. But for every relationship that ends because it can't survive your authenticity, new relationships become possible based on genuine recognition and mutual respect. For every opportunity that disappears because it required you to be someone you're not, new possibilities emerge that actually match who you are. This isn't about becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It's about becoming genuinely considerate, considering not just what others want from you, but what you authentically have to offer. It's about moving from people-pleasing to people-serving, from performance to presence, from manipulation to authentic influence. When you operate from your integrated self rather than your fragmented personas, you become more effective in every area of life. Your work becomes an expression of your authentic capabilities rather than a performance of borrowed skills. Your creativity flows from genuine inspiration rather than forced production. Your leadership emerges from authentic authority rather than positional power. This is the secret that people living passionate lives have learned. They haven't eliminated struggle or achieved some state of perpetual happiness. They've learned to struggle authentically rather than struggle against themselves. The challenges they face in pursuing their authentic expression feel different from the challenges of maintaining false personas. The difficulties are real, but they're difficulties that align with their true nature rather than working against it. When you're fighting for something that matters to you authentically, the effort energizes rather than drains you. When you're solving problems that engage your genuine interests, and capabilities. Obstacles become puzzles rather than punishments. When you're creating something that expresses your integrated self, setbacks become information rather than evidence of inadequacy. This shift from struggle against yourself to struggle for yourself changes the entire quality of your experience. You're still dealing with the inevitable challenges of being human, but you're dealing with them from a place of authentic power rather than performed adequacy. The passionate life isn't a life without problems. It's a life where your problems are aligned with your authentic nature rather than created by resistance to it. Jung understood that the goal of psychological development isn't the elimination of suffering, but the transformation of neurotic suffering into authentic suffering. Neurotic suffering comes from fighting against reality, including the reality of who you are. Authentic suffering comes from engaging fully with reality, including the reality of what your authentic expression requires. When you stop wasting energy on maintaining false personas and start directing that energy toward authentic expression, you don't escape difficulty. You transform your relationship with difficulty. Challenges become opportunities for growth rather than evidence of failure. Setbacks become course corrections rather than indictments of your worth. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds gradually through thousands of small choices to honor your authentic self rather than perform your acceptable self. Each choice builds on the previous ones, creating momentum toward integrated living. The person you're becoming through this process isn't someone new. It's who you've always been underneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. The passionate engagement with life that you're seeking isn't something you need to develop. It's something you need to stop suppressing. Your authentic passion isn't hiding somewhere waiting to be discovered. It's operating right now, beneath your awareness, in the way you naturally engage with life when you forget to perform. It shows up in the conversations that energize you, the problems that fascinate you, the activities that make you lose track of time. You don't need to find your passion. You need to remove the obstacles that prevent you from expressing it. These obstacles aren't external circumstances that need to change before you can be authentic. They're internal patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that develop to protect you but now limit you. They're the voices that tell you to be practical instead of passionate, safe instead of authentic, acceptable instead of real. The journey of individuation is the process of recognizing these protective patterns, appreciating what they've provided, and consciously choosing when to use them versus when to set them aside in favor of authentic expression. This is your birthright as a human being, not the right to be happy or successful or even loved, but the right to be authentically yourself. Not the self you think you should be, or the self others want you to be, but the self you actually are when all the masks come off and all the pretenses fall away. That self has been waiting your entire life for permission to exist. That self contains all the passion, creativity, and life force you've been seeking outside yourself. That self knows exactly what needs to be expressed through your unique combination of gifts, wounds, interests, and capabilities. The moment you give yourself permission to be that self, everything changes. Not because your circumstances magically transform, but because you transform your relationship with your circumstances. You stop being a victim of your conditioning and become a conscious participant in your own becoming. This is the liberation that Jung understood and that our culture has forgotten. True freedom isn't the absence of limitations, it's the conscious choice to express your authentic nature within whatever limitations exist. You are already free. You have always been free. You just forgot while you were busy trying to become someone else. Remember now. Remember who you are, beneath who you think you should be. Stop seeking your passion and start being it. Stop trying to find yourself and start expressing yourself. Stop waiting for permission and start giving yourself the greatest gift you could ever receive, the gift of your own authentic presence in this world. Your authentic self is ready. Your integrated nature is available. Your passionate engagement with life is waiting. The only question left is this: are you ready to set yourself free? If you found yourself recognizing parts of your own story in this message, you're not alone in this awakening. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What masks are you ready to remove? What aspects of yourself are you ready to integrate? Your courage to be authentic gives others permission to do the same, and if this resonates with your journey toward wholeness, subscribe for more insights into the psychology of authentic living. because the world needs who you really are, not who you think you should be.